This is Parahan, and you are listening to The Parahan Show. Thank you guys for listening. This is Parahan, your host, and tonight we got an interesting show for you. We're going to talk everything from zombies to the UFO Disclosure Movement, all the way to cryptocurrencies. So you guys are going to want to pay attention because we got an amazing show tonight. So recently, I was reading this story about a Civil War soldier who had written a journal about an encounter he had with Civil War zombies. Yeah, that's right, zombies. I said it, It sounds crazy, but this isn't the first time that I've heard about these Civil War zombies. Believe it or not, there's been lots of stories that involve these entities that appear to be the living dead. Now, this story takes place out of Richmond, Virginia. Apparently, there was this man, Richard Seymour, who had served in the Union Army at the time and was stationed outside of Richmond, Virginia. Now, he said one night, he was camped outside of Richmond, Virginia, out in the wilderness with his unit. And apparently, while they were in their camp in the middle of the night, they heard loud noises coming towards their camp. What sounded like an onrush of oncoming soldiers. And that's when they could see off in the distance what looked like shapes of humans coming out of the woods. But it soon appeared to them that these soldiers were more than simply Confederate soldiers. They appeared to be the living dead. They were missing limbs. They had blood pouring out of different portions of their body. They looked very much deceased than alive, and they were heading full force towards their camp. They began to fire upon them continuously, without avail. The soldiers would not fall down. They continued coming towards them, and it took a very long time to actually bring these soldiers down. And they noticed about these soldiers that most of them appeared to be afflicted with gunshot wounds, battle wounds, but yet still seemed to be alive. Were very pale-skinned, and their flesh was actually decaying. So what they mentioned were zombies, an arsenal of zombie soldiers that was coming at their camp. Now, this Civil War soldier went on to write about this in his journal. And he passed this journal down to his son, who then passed it down to his son, who found this interesting story and brought it forth because it seemed very different than the other stories that were mentioned in his journal about battles that he'd fought in the Civil War. And apparently from this story, this man went on to bring this story actually up to Ulysses S. Grant and tell them what had happened, how they had experienced these Confederate zombie soldiers. And Ulysses S. Grant simply dismissed it as being the effects of being in war too long, and that this was sort of shell shock, and these soldiers had just experienced, PTSD and had been fighting too long. And so this was simply dismissed, and they never looked into it to figure out what was going on. But this soldier believed that they did know more than they were alluding to, but they tried to completely cover it up because they didn't want the general population to know about it. So if this is a true story, I mean, this is amazing. This is unique. And, you know, like I've said before, this isn't a one-time thing. I've heard several stories about these zombie-type soldiers. One famous story that actually comes about these zombie-like Civil War soldiers actually comes from a truck driver who was returning from Mexico into the Texas border in an area that was a Civil War site. After the Civil War had ended, apparently there was a skirmish between the Confederate and the Union armies that took place, and there was a lot of bloodshed. Now, apparently this truck driver and his wife were driving into Texas from Mexico, transporting a load, and they had gotten tired, and there was a small little town outside of the border, and they looked for a back road to park their truck to sleep for a while because they gotten very tired. It was very late. So they pulled off their truck to the side of the road on this back road, not realizing this was actually a site of a Civil War battle that had taken place 200 years beforehand. Now, they laid in the back of the sleeper cab of their truck when they heard a knock at the door. And they couldn't figure out who would be knocking at the door in the middle of the night because they were basically out in the middle of nowhere, out in this field. When they looked out the front window, the windshield, they could see lights off in the distance. And they said, what is that light? You know, why is this light moving around out in front of the vehicle? So they proceeded to get out of the truck and walk towards this light when they heard the sound of people talking, kind of yelling, almost like soldiers giving commands. And they got this weird feeling like, because they could hear these voices, but they couldn't see anybody. And finally, all of a sudden, these figures start coming into focus, and they could see the figures of what appeared to be humans moving towards them. As they look closely at these figures, it appears that these figures are basically zombies. What appear to be soldiers, but zombies, you know, missing body parts, bleeding from various parts. Their flesh looks like it's rotting off their skin. It looks like as if they had risen from the grave, and they are proceeding towards this man and his wife and towards their truck. And he said that, this terrified them, so they ran back to their truck, got inside, and all night long, these zombie soldiers were basically hitting on their truck, banging on the truck, pushing the truck around. And they could feel the truck shaking. They could hear them pounding on the truck. And in the morning, when they finally were able to see what was going on, there were still zombie soldiers around, and they proceeded to leave. And when they got to a gas station, they got outside their truck, and they had noticed there were all these handprints, bloody handprints, all over their truck. And that they knew that something had happened that night because there was these handprints on the truck. So like I said, there are several stories like this, and specifically in certain areas where there have been historic Civil War battles, where people report not only seeing the ghost of Civil War soldiers, but actually these zombie-like entities where they appear to have wounds and disfigurements, and the body seems to be rotting, as if these soldiers are not just ghosts, but they have risen from the grave, which is very terrifying when you think about it. But we have accounts of zombies going back thousands of years ago. They have recently found a tomb in Egypt where they identified a mummy, and that was very well preserved. that's had its brain intact, and they were able to dissect this brain and find that this pharaoh had in fact some sort of disease that was very zombie-like, that would have caused him to exhibit signs of what we would know as a zombie. And there's even references to this and to zombie soldiers in ancient Egypt in depictions in hieroglyphics. Alexander the Great, in one of his many stories of his journeys, he recalls a battle with these zombie-like soldiers who are almost impossible to beat, and eventually they kill them, but they come away with many casualties. Cultures all over the world, the Chinese in Mesoamerica, we hear these stories of the living dead coming back from the grave. And what's interesting is that a lot of cultures are terrified of the dead rising from the grave. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is there so much of a fear that someone would return from the dead? Because when you look at a lot of ancient civilizations, they had certain practices to dissuade the dead from returning. They had taken great precaution in burial ceremonies in keeping the dead contained, believing that they could possibly return. More specifically, if you look at the Celts, the ancient Celtic people, right? They believed October 31st, Samhain as they called it, was this time in which the dead could return to the earth and walk amongst the living. And they developed all these traditions, leaving offerings, leaving out jack-o'-lanterns, dressing up in costume, right? And they believed that the dead would return on this day, hence where we have Halloween from. Halloween is derived out of this fear that the dead would return. And throughout civilization, you see this fear of the dead returning. And you have to wonder, why did the ancient people take such precaution with burial of dead? Why were they so afraid of the dead returning? Because did it happen several times in the past? Did they know that the zombies existed, that there was a possibility of zombies? I mean, could the dead be restless? Could they return from their grave? And did the ancient civilizations know about this? Why did the Egyptians build pyramids and fill it full of stuff that you would need when you were alive? Why did they fill it full of the pharaohs and the king's favorite things, their pets, their favorite stuff? Why did they do that? What made them want to do that? Is it because they believed that these pharaohs, these kings, would return from the dead, and that they would keep them contained in this pyramid? And these pyramids were essentially a way of containing this spirit, this zombie, and that they would have the things they needed to live in this pyramid. Which is, it's very interesting to think about, because they're not the only society, the only civilization that did this. It's still to this day, when you think about it, we bury the dead 6 feet under. And there's a reason, because we believe if the dead is buried any less than 6 feet under, then they could arise from the grave. Okay? Tombstones were invented as a way to keep the bodies underground, to keep the bodies from rising. There were these heavy rock, concrete structures that would keep them underground. And it's almost like they wanted to seal these people up because they knew something. If you go to Romania and you go to other Eastern European countries, they very much believe in vampires. And they believe that if certain precautions are not taken, if a person they believe was a vampire is not procured and buried the right way, then they will return as a vampire. And there are several accounts of desecrations of graves in Romania where they will actually dig up the grave, take out the heart from a body, burn it, and, put things like garlic and stuff like that because they believe that these vampires could return. And this is where the legends of vampires originate, actually, is from Romania, is from Transylvania, is from Eastern Europe. So why did they do that? And that's a question you have to ask yourself. Why did we take such precaution in making sure the dead would not return from the grave? Is it possible that zombies exist and they are a reality and that people can return from the dead? Something definitely to think about. And when you look at the CDC and FEMA, right, they have guidelines, they have things right now, if you go to their websites, on how to be prepared for a zombie apocalypse. It's as if they're joking about it, but they're also kind of like, yeah, we're not really joking about this. This could possibly happen. Why does the CDC, why does FEMA, who are these serious organizations that are equipped with keeping us safe in times of disaster, giving guidelines on how to survive a zombie apocalypse? You have to wonder, do they know something more than we know? Has there been a huge cover-up throughout time that the dead have been rising from the grave, that the zombies can return? I've even heard stories alluded to the fact that maybe the Confederates were doing some sort of experimentation on bringing the dead back. And if you look at the South, right, where the Confederates were located, in the regions of Louisiana and New Orleans, you have the voodoo culture, right? And voodoo culture believes very much in zombies. They have a ritual. They believe that inside of us, we have two spirits, the big angel and the little angel, and that after we die, if not certain precautions are taken, they can those two parts of our soul can actually return to the body and we can come back to life. They even believe that a body can be controlled by a voodoo priestess and be brought back to life as a zombie, as a servant or a slave, if you will. And voodoo culture very much believes in zombie. And that actually, the term zombie originated from northeastern Africa, where it was brought over into Jamaica, into the Caribbean, and this voodoo culture developed out of sort of this belief, essentially, in things like zombies. And this is where we get the term zombie from. And so we have to wonder, could the Confederate soldiers have known about the voodoo practices in Louisiana and New Orleans at that time, worked with these voodoo priestesses, and tried to resurrect the dead soldiers to help them win the Civil War? Was there some sort of experiments going on with the Confederate Army where they were actually trying to resurrect dead soldiers and use them against the Union armies? Something very interesting to think about. And when we do more shows, we'll definitely talk about this and talk more zombies. But I just thought that was very interesting because I'd been looking into zombie soldiers. So next, we are going to move on to the UFO Disclosure Movement, which has been a really big thing lately. A lot of people have gotten aboard this whole UFO Disclosure Movement, which is sort of interesting for me because As a paranormal researcher, as a person who is into ufology, who's done UFO research, it's interesting to see the field change. It used to be 10, 15 years ago, we were not so much investigating videos in the sky and pictures of the, that were taken in the sky. A lot of UFO research was done on the ground, was done talking to witnesses, to getting firsthand accounts from witnesses who had experiences with UFOs, with what they believed were aliens or extraterrestrials. Most of it was taking past research that had been done from accounts of people who had experienced things at Roswell, who had experienced things at Maury Island, all over the country, these people that had encounters with UFOs, and using that research to understand how UFOs work, how they function, who they might be, where they might be from. Is it possibly extraterrestrial nature? But now there is this movement that has taken place where we have people wanting the truth so badly that they are actually pushing for the heads of the country to release classified information, to release any documents or files that they might have about research they've done into UFOs. Now, the problem I have with UFO disclosure is that it doesn't work, right? Because the people we are asking to disclose information about UFOs have lied to us in the past. We've seen this with Project Blue Book. There was this group that was formed by Congress to investigate UFOs and to look into the strange things that were happening all over the country during that time, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And well, what came out of that investigation and then that report was that it was nothing at all. These were all natural occurrences. They could be explained away. Now, the head of Project Blue Book, which J. Allen Hynek, right, who was leading this research, he felt like he was being misled by the military and that he was being told not to really speak upon this. So he later went off, and this is how we had MUFON, the Mutual UFO organization that was formed to investigate UFOs, because we felt like Project Blue Book didn't really tell us anything and wasn't giving us the truth. And so that's where MUFON came from. And so we've trusted these people before to give us information on UFOs and to research this, and they failed. They didn't give us the information that people were looking for. They didn't tell us the truth. We were deceived. We were misled, and therefore led to the creation of groups like MUFON to investigate the truth. And a lot of it was dismissal, which we see today. And the other problem with disclosure is that basically there are certain levels of security clearance. There's a need-to-know basis. So only specific people are going to actually know about UFOs and extraterrestrial life, or if there is anything pertaining to that. There's only certain people that are going to be cleared on a level to understand this. And even politicians, higher up officials, are not going to know anything about UFOs because they don't have the need-to-know basis. They don't have the classification. If you look at JFK, J. Edgar Hoover, people like this, right, it's believed that they had no idea of UFOs until it was mentioned to them. It was brought to their attention, because a lot of this information is not only kept hidden from the general public, but it's kept hidden from a lot of higher officials. And not a lot of people know about the workings of what's going on with UFO research inside the government and what is happening with that. So the problem with disclosure is that even if they create this sort of task force within itself, within the country of, governing officials, the problem is that these people are going to be about as knowledgeable as the general public when it comes to information that's going to be divulged to them. So they're not going to be able to share much with us. We're not going to be able to get much information from them because they're not going to know much information. It, like I said, it's a need-to-know basis. So only certain people are going to know about this stuff. I mean, there's levels and levels of security clearance that you would have to get through. And I'm sure there's very small, limited amounts of people who actually know about the existence of places like Area 51, Area 52, Dulce, some of these other top secret classified programs and sites, because the initial key is to keep this secret, is secrecy. You don't want this getting out to the general public, and it would be unsafe to share this knowledge with too many people for security reasons. And so you can't give this information out. So I think it's more of like, people are getting restless, asking for answers. And the only thing they can do is sort of give them a little belly rub of information to say, yeah, we're looking into it. We're keeping an eye on it, to kind of dissuade us from pushing more, and I think it's just an operative to kind of silence those who are researching UFOs and wanting more. But, like I said, I don't really understand what you're going to learn from disclosure, because being an old school ufologist, paranormal researcher, most of the information that you get is on the ground from firsthand accounts of encounters with extraterrestrials or UFOs, as you would call it. We've learned a lot over the years through ufologists who've went out and spoken with witnesses. James Mcdonald, right, who's a professor at the University of Arizona, was a very prominent figure in ufology, went out into the field. He investigated cases like the Heflin case, which was these photos taken of a flying saucer that were believed to be real. And he interviewed, Heflin himself, and determined that he felt like Heflin was telling the truth and that these were real, legitimate photos of flying saucers. And even James McDonald himself had experiences with what he believed were UFOs in the Arizona mountains that led him to want to research these things. And, he had spoken to several key witnesses, Socorro, New Mexico, right? Where there was this sighting by a police officer, Lonnie Zamora, who's seen this craft land in the New Mexico desert and see these beings come out of it. And this was a well-respected police officer in the area who encountered something that could have jeopardized his career, but he spoke upon it. And James McDonald interviewed him and believed that Lonnie Zamora really had seen something and experienced something. And this is where he had gathered a lot of knowledge and information about UFOs. And what's interesting about James McDonald is he died in such mysterious circumstances. He was found dead by suicide, and apparently he tried to commit suicide at one point, was paralyzed, and then apparently was successful and was found in a ditch with a bullet wound to his head. And a lot of people believed that he hadn't committed suicide, which was very eerily similar to Morris K. Jessup, who was also a big prominent figure in ufology, who had experienced something different, who was found dead by suicide in his car, believed to die, but to have committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. So it's very interesting because most of the research, the information has come from on-the-ground research, from talking to these cases, what appear to be real encounters with UFOs or extraterrestrials. And I think we're going to find that over time that this is where we're going to learn more about UFOs and extraterrestrials than from actually trying to get information given to us and disclosed to us. But that's just me. That's how I feel. I'm sure other people think differently, but being a paranormal researcher, ufologist, that's how I feel. Next, let's move on to cryptocurrency, right? Because cryptocurrency is the new wave. Everybody's getting behind cryptocurrency. And today, we actually seen something very alarming. We seen a cryptocurrency crash, which I believe we are experiencing a modern day stock market crash, a new Great Depression. And listen to this because I will continue to explain this, but I've said for a while, I think it's very unsafe to invest in cryptocurrency, invest in anything that isn't backed by something physical. When I first started seeing cryptocurrency take off this past year, I was very concerned about it because so many people were getting behind it, because there were some decent gains for people. Some people made some money. But you got to understand that this is very much like gambling, okay? It's very easy to put money into a slot machine, win $100 and think, maybe I'll win $500, put that $100 in and lose it all. And that's basically what this is. This is a big gamble. And you have to be very careful because it's not backed by anything physical. One of the things that concerns me is currently we are going through inflation. We're going through a shortage of workers. And we are going through a pandemic. This is a bad time to invest in anything that isn't physically backed, because it's very unsafe, and the market fluctuates so much based on what's happening with the pandemic, what's happening with inflation. And one thing people don't understand is they think cryptocurrency is a safe bet because it's not money, it's not the dollar, right? But what people don't understand is that cryptocurrency is backed by the American dollar. That when you invest in cryptocurrency, right, it relies on the American dollar to keep it moving along. You see what I'm saying? If you own $60,000 in Bitcoin, if you own one Bitcoin, which at one time was, I think, $62,000 or something like that, maybe higher. If you owned a Bitcoin, right, and it's worth $62,000, that's American dollars, right? But if that American dollar is worth nothing, that's worth $62,000 is worth nothing because of the American dollar is worth nothing. So the valuation of cryptocurrency is based off the American dollar. So depending on the worth of the American dollar, that could affect the valuation of cryptocurrency. And that's why you have to be very careful with that, because there's nothing physically backing this online. You know, the thing is this. You have to think of it in terms like this. If there was an apocalyptic event, if money was no longer good, money meant nothing, okay, and you were forced with a situation where you had to survive, okay, things like food, things like resources, things like precious metals are going to become more valuable than cryptocurrency. Okay, cryptocurrency is going to be absolutely worthless if you were in a situation like that where you had to survive, where you needed food, where you needed resources. That cryptocurrency is worthless, just like the dollar is worthless. The only good commodity is going to be things that you can trade, and cryptocurrency isn't going to be tradable. Money isn't tradable. And that's what I mean by it not being physically backed by anything. There's nothing protecting you in the event that apocalyptic disaster happened, that the worst happened. Also, you have to understand that the cryptocurrency market is essentially one big gamble. Okay, these people set the prices. They set the value of what cryptocurrency is worth. And you have to think of it in terms of like this, there was a time when Beanie Babies were very valuable. And now there's people that still find Beanie Babies and they say, I'm going to buy these Beanie Babies. Like myself even, you buy these Beanie Babies and you think, oh, these are worth something, But the problem is that there's not a market right now for Beanie Babies. There's not a lot of people wanting to buy Beanie Babies for a high price, for their actual face value. There's, not a lot of people that would pay what that Beanie Baby is actually worth. So just because someone says, hey, this Beanie Baby's worth $1,000, doesn't mean that someone actually is going to pay $1,000. Doesn't mean there's a big enough market for people demanding these Beanie Babies to warrant someone paying $1,000 for that. And if you go on eBay right now and you search like I think it's Tabasco is the bull, right? Who is this bull that's supposed to be worth $1,000, $2,000? You can find this bull for $5 or $6 on eBay because so many people are selling them right now. And that's the problem is these cryptocurrencies, they're given a valuation of how much a crypto coin is worth, but necessarily someone may not actually see that value. There might not be a huge market for cryptocurrency, and someone's not willing to pay that. And you look at most people when they want to buy cryptocurrency, they want to buy it at its lowest cost. Someone would rather buy it at $30,000 a Bitcoin than $60,000 a Bitcoin. And that is the biggest problem with cryptocurrency, is trying to find someone that's going to pay that price for cryptocurrency. And essentially, cryptocurrency relies on people buying more cryptocurrency, on buying shares of cryptocurrency, because that raises the price of the share. And once the price of cryptocurrencies go up to a specific price, people don't see the allure anymore. Why would I buy cryptocurrency at $60,000, at $62,000? That's too big of a risk. Why would I pay $2,000 for a Beanie Baby that may not resell for $2,000? And that becomes the issue with cryptocurrencies. And also, what happens is it all comes down to supply and demand, right? One of the big things I've seen that dropped prices of a lot of cryptocurrencies is there was a set amount of coins. But then the companies themselves said, hey, we're going to actually produce more coins. So when there was more coins readily available, it dropped the price of these cryptocurrencies. And once all the coins are bought up, what makes you think these companies aren't going to say, hey, we've sold all the crypto coins, okay? Let's create more crypto coins so we can sell more and make more money. So they produce more coins, and that cryptocurrency becomes less valuable. And now you have all these cryptocurrencies competing with one another, where there's so many different cryptocurrencies, right, that it makes the value of that cryptocurrency less, because there's tons of cryptocurrencies competing with one another. And if you have the American dollar, right, when you look at that, there's only one American dollar. There's not tons of different dollars that the Americans use that are competing against one another. And if you were to print more of that American money, that paper, the value of that dollar goes down. And that's the same with cryptocurrency. So that's why I think this is a huge risk. My grandfather grew up, my great-grandfather, he grew up during the Great Depression. And I got to know him when I was younger. And he always hid money in his home, behind his pictures, behind things. He always kept paintings. He always kept bars of gold. And he said he did that because he lived during the Depression. When they went to the banks and there was no money, they couldn't give them their money back. So one of the problems is if these things aren't physically backed. One day you might go to draw your cryptocurrency and sell it and get your money back, and the money may not be there. If you have a bar of gold, right, that bar of gold is going to be there. As long as you keep track of it, it's going to be there. You can claim the price of that gold. You can sell that gold at any time because it's physically going to be there. But the problem with cryptocurrencies is that at any time, it could simply just up and vanish. It could disappear. It could be no longer available. And that's why I think we have to be very careful with cryptocurrency and trusting the cryptocurrency, because I think it could be very dangerous. Well, thank you guys for listening. This is Parahan. Have a great Saturday night. Peace out.